Good evening, everybody. Uneducated Economist here. I don't know where the dice are at. I'm sorry. No dice today. Anyway, we're going to talk about Bitcoin in this video and how it will not be used as a world reserve currency or a reserve currency for any single country out there. And when I see a lot of the mainstream media articles, or at least the talking of using Bitcoin as a reserve currency, I find this to be a very dangerous thing to take place, as a lot of people really get excited about this idea and then start moving into a position in Bitcoin. Ultimately, it turns out that Bitcoin doesn't really get used for any of the stuff that people are anticipating, or it doesn't move into a direction in which that people feel that is going to be that of a world reserve currency. And it doesn't do what it is that people are thinking, and it turns out that they don't really want to hold that position and they lose out on it anyway. That's usually ends up being the results of a pump and dump. Like, if you're not exactly sure why it is you're getting into Bitcoin, other than you believe that it's going to be a world reserve currency coming in the future, that's very dangerous to think, because the idea of the Bitcoin world reserve currency means that the dollar would not exist. It would have to fail. And see, this is what Jerome Powell was talking about when he said that Bitcoin is more of a competitor against gold than it is the dollar itself. And that's true, because if you think about it, the gold was the world reserve currency for a really long time. And dollars are now the world reserve currency. And how did that take place? Because if you understand how it is that dollars were able to take the place of gold, then it starts making sense on why it's not going to be replaced, or that the dollar will not be replaced back with Bitcoin. See, gold is a limited reserve. There's only so much of it out there. And if you have a limited amount of gold that can be spread amongst the people, you're going to have a limited amount of transactions that can take place. Now, typically, this is going to be a balancing act between those who have and those who have not, as the concentration of wealth eventually leads to decline in economic activity, and the redistribution of that wealth goes back out and begins again. And this usually is taking place under a limited system like gold. But if you want to continue on with the transactions, you got to be able to facilitate the trade using something. And if you don't have enough gold to do it, then you're going to be using paper. And this is ultimately how the dollar was able to replace gold, because people for the longest time believed when they were using dollars, they were using gold. And if you believed that you were using gold, you didn't question it, you continued to do the transactions. When people realized over time that there was far more dollars than there was gold out there to cover the dollars that had been printed, that's when things started getting messy. And when people are like, well, we're going to trade all our dollars in for gold, there wasn't going to be enough gold to cover all them dollars. The severing of the gold standard took place. Now, people didn't like this idea, and you could call it a manipulation to get to that point, but ultimately everybody wanted to do transactions. So when it comes to being able to do transactions, the dollar was able to facilitate the trade. And it continued to facilitate the trade until today. And there's nothing out there that's even coming close to replacing it. So when we think about Bitcoin coming in to replace dollar or to be a reserve, we have to understand that there is a way that that money comes into the nation. See, the United States was able to acquire all the gold because we were a manufacturing powerhouse at the time. And when we concentrated all the wealth into this country and it was time to relinquish it back out there to the rest of the world, we said, no, we're not going to do that. So now, in order to be in a position in which that we acquire all the Bitcoin, we would have to be a manufacturer again, having all the nations out there of the world sending us their Bitcoin. And we would have to be producing stuff and sending it to them. So now when we think about what it is that we would be doing, is that we would be importing stuff and exporting what? The reserve. See, now we export dollars, but there was a time when we would have been exporting gold. Or in this case, if it was Bitcoin, we would be exporting Bitcoin. And if you're not importing money because you're in a trade deficit like we are today, then there's no way that you're going to be able to sustain yourself, and you're eventually going to collapse. And see, this is where I find that returning to a Bitcoin or a gold, or returning to a gold standard, or even establishing a Bitcoin standard is not favorable to the United States, not even close. If we were a production saving nation, I would say, oh yeah, let's do it, man. I'd be all over it. But we're not a production saving nation. We're a debtor consumer nation. And as much as I would like to see it be a producing saving nation, that's not what we do. And it isn't anything that's going to change that in the coming future. There's going to be attempts, there's going to be tariffs, and there's going to be subsidies, and there's going to be new innovations and attempt to try and bring manufacturing back to the United States. But ultimately, you're never going to be able to manufacture as cheap as another foreign nation out there. And when it's always about profits at the end of the day, they're going to go to the cheapest place you can manufacture. And that's all that's all that's going to come down to it. And so even if you were to take in the idea of automations and robotics and not using the labor and the cost of labor to go into these products, but simply using technologies, it's eventually going to come down to energy costs. Which nations have the cheapest energy? And then from that point, it's going to be distribution. Which ones have the cheapest energy that can distribute? Get it out there to the rest of the nations out there in the world, whatever product it happens to be. See, this is really how it ends up going down. You can't force these things. You can try. You can manipulate as much as you want, but the underlying economic forces are still at play, and they're always going to be at play. So it's better to understand it for what it really is, and that Gresham's law is not going to allow a good currency to come in and replace a bad currency. It doesn't work like that. The bad currency has to fail completely because the good currency is going to get hoarded away. Very much like what would happen if the United States was to try and deal in a Bitcoin currency. We would find that all our Bitcoin would be sent off to foreign lands for their production. We're not going to go too long on this live stream. We're going to keep it like at a half an hour maybe. So let's see here. Good night, everyone. It says, let's see. Boy, I don't have my glasses with me. Let's see. Currency always gets debased. Yeah, I mean, I guess eventually it always does. I mean, if you go back even, hundreds, even, 1,000 years ago, they talked about debasing currencies, even through the idea of coin clipping, like Gresham's law, like, Robert Gresham had noticed. All right. We don't need world reserve currency, do we? Do you need a world reserve currency? Well, you need a currency of some sort in order to facilitate the trade. Like, everybody has to agree upon it. If I trade in, like, if you just used a sovereign currency of your choice, let's just kind of assume that, because, like, the BRICS nations coming up and using their own currency is kind of like a big topic out there. Now, let's just assume that you're going to use any particular currency out there that's available. And now you go and you do a bunch of deals with India and you get a bunch of rupees like Russia did. And now you are Russia with a bunch of rupees and you go like, hey, I need to go get some stuff from somebody who is not India. And you go to that other nation and you say to them, hey, I want your stuff. I got these rupees. And they'd be like, well, that's cool, but we don't want rupees. Like, we got rupees too. And we're loaded on rupees. We're rupee heavy. We don't want rupees. We want some other nation's currency. So now, in order for Russia to do the deal with that other nation who is not accepting rupees or doesn't want rupees or is not going to make it, easy on Russia to use those rupees with them, Russia's going to have to sell those rupees out there for whatever it is that the other nation is asking for. And as they do that, what they are going to do is devalue the rupee as they go about that. So this is not favorable to a nation to deal in a sovereign currency that is not accepted throughout all the rest of the nations out there. So when you're doing a deal with dollars, you're going to do the deal with this nation, and that nation will take those dollars, and you don't have to question it. In fact, all nations pretty much would deal with the dollars up until, we find recently with the sanctions and everything that's going on with it. Even now, Russia is still buying U.S. treasuries. And they're not even allowed to use the dollar, but yet they know that without having a safe and liquid asset like U.S. treasuries, they're not going to be able to do the business deals that they want with other nations out there because all nations want U.S. treasuries or U.S. dollars. because it is the world reserve currency that all other nations are willing to accept, and they don't have to worry about inefficiencies by using a sovereign nation's currency that isn't necessarily widely accepted throughout the other nations. So yeah, you need a world reserve currency, whether it's Bitcoin or gold or a dollar. And since the idea of using gold would only be or Bitcoin would only be favorable to a producing saving nation, there's no way that it's going to be accepted throughout all the consumer nations, which is what the producing nations would want to deal in, right? I mean, I guess you could attempt to force them into using gold, saying, hey, we're not going to sell you our commodities or anything else unless you deal in gold, but it would only be just a short amount of time before it would either be all gone and distributed and out to the most industrious people out there, while the rest of the people would be suffering in pain and misery. But it wouldn't easily be done that fashion, because you would have the competing currency of the dollar out there, which would essentially cause the gold to get hoarded away, and it would never actually make it to a point where it could be used. It's just like, to understand it is to understand that the dollar would need to fail. Like it can't exist side by side with a good currency. It doesn't work like that. The good currency would always get hoarded away. So once the dollar fails, then yes, we can find that there would be another attempt. Even gold and Bitcoin could probably serve its purpose during that time, but it would have to be a complete collapse of the dollar first in order for that to happen. All right, moving on. Let's see here. Man, I'm having a hard time seeing. Okay, Bitcoin will definitely work as a payment system. It definitely will not. Coinbase has working crypto belt card. That's not the problem. L1 layers solve the payment speed problems. It's not about the speed, and it's not about the transaction times or anything else like that. All that stuff is fine. You can use all that stuff. That's not the point. The point is that the Bitcoin is limited in how much you have available. Now, you can use it in a currency transaction saying, no, man, look, I got all my Bitcoin sitting right here on this here debit card, and I'm going to go down to the store, and I'm going to go and spend my Bitcoin down there at the store. But when you slide that card at that machine, you are transacting in dollars, because that machine and that bank and the people that they are dealing with is eventually going to put dollars into that store. Now, there may come a point in the future where there will be some people who say, I have Bitcoin priced, or I have items priced in Bitcoin. Now, think about that for just a second. If you had an item priced in Bitcoin 2 weeks ago, I was selling it for, let's just assume 1 Bitcoin, right? 2 weeks ago. And now people are coming in saying, hey, you were selling it for 1 Bitcoin, but now you're thinking, well, it's gone up to $100,000, right? It's because you have 2 different currencies going on here. You got the reserve currency, which everybody is pricing it to, right? The dollar. And then you got this commodity that people say, hey, we can transact in this commodity. It would be like dealing with a silver coin or something of that nature, right? This is a limited system. If you were to price everything in Bitcoin and you start distributing Bitcoin out there, you're going to find that everything that you have priced in Bitcoin would have to be less and less Bitcoin in order. You'd have to accept less and less Bitcoin in order to do the transaction, because Bitcoin would be a deflationary currency, meaning that the people who are most industrious would be hoarding it away, leaving limited amount out there for the people to do and use for transactions. The more business is done in Bitcoin and the more the industrious people are hoarding it away, the less the people are going to be able to do transactions. Now, you can say, well, they can just keep lowering the price, lowering the Bitcoin acceptance, how much you're willing to accept Bitcoin for, or accept Bitcoin for your item, right? You can keep saying, well, we'll just have to accept less and less Bitcoin in order to facilitate the transaction because it's getting hoarded away. Now, this is the deflationary, depressionary effects that takes place with a limited reserve currency, such as Bitcoin or gold. Eventually, it gets to a point where there's no more business to be had, and the people who had hoarded it away have no other choice but to start relinquishing it back out there. These are the booms and bust cycles. Now, I'm actually down for it. Let's do it, man. Because like I understand and recognize how this is going to go down, so I'm cool with it, right? I'm not trying to argue against it. I'm just saying that it ain't going to work. But if it did, right, I'm down for it. Like I think I can, conduct myself in a way that is going to give me the ability to like make it through the booms and bust cycles, right? To know to, save for those days when the booms are gonna, or during the boom times, and then during the bust cycles, hopefully have, put it away enough that I can make it through those times. But to understand that this is the way that it has to go down, because there's nobody going to come out and bail you out, because there's no ability to bail out. Right? All the crypto and all the Bitcoin that's available out there will be hoarded away, and you can't just magically produce Bitcoin. Like right now, you can magically produce dollars and say, "Hey, we're going to throw out a bunch of stimulus, and like all these people will be able to eat, and you'll be able to, provide, abundance to a particular direction, for whatever reason that you wanted to." None of that stuff would exist, right? You wouldn't have welfare programs like we have today. You wouldn't have Social Security and none of that stuff. You can only do that if you have a fiat currency. So again, like I'm cool with it. Like I'm like, okay, well, if this is going to be the way it's going to be, then I'm cool with it. I can do it. But that's not the way it's going to go down. It can't go down that way. People aren't going to vote that in, and it's not something that can be easily just replaced. So when it comes to like a fiat currency competing against a good currency, the fiat currency will always win so long as everybody is using it. The moment that people don't use it anymore, and I'm not just saying, hey, that group of people over there don't want to use it anymore. I'm talking when nobody is using it anymore, when you do not accept it for a paycheck, when you do not take it down to the bank, when you don't go to the grocery store and use it, when you don't have it anymore in your possession, that's when it's failing. Right now, you're willing to pay taxes. Right now, you're willing to invest with it. Right now, you're pricing everything out in dollars, including the Bitcoin. Right? And gold and silver. And these things are all priced in dollars because everybody is looking at dollars. Dollars is the transaction that makes it, or facilitates the transaction. So it's not a matter of time, like the speed. It's not a matter of the efficiencies of it. What matters is the availability, and to be able to have a business that says, hey man, I want to borrow some money, which would be the Bitcoin, and start this business. And once you start the business, you find that it's a deflationary currency, which means that your loan that you have to pay back is getting ever increasingly more difficult. So why would I have started this business? I'm going to have to default on my business because I can't pay it back because we have a deflationary currency. Right? It makes taking out loans almost virtually impossible for people. On any kind of the more loans you get out there, the more bigger the bust is going to take place, because you're not going to be able to facilitate all those loans. And there won't be enough money out there. All right. Jobs guarantee health care. And what is that? Retirement at the age of 63 years. Old China does this without a fiat currency. If you're a producing nation, you could do that. If you're a producing saving nation, you could do something like that. Yeah. Because when you're a producing saving nation, what you are doing is you're producing stuff and sending it out there to foreign people who are then sending you their money. Now you have new money. So if you have new money coming in, you can do all kinds of stuff, right? You can have all the luxurious life that you want. Problem with this is that if you live in this luxurious life, eventually what you are going to do is you're going to raise your standard of living and make it ever more difficult for you to compete against those foreign producers that are out there, and you're going to find your domestic manufacturers leaving the state. Now, this does take time, and how many years or decades or hundreds of years or centuries, whatever it takes to get through all this, this is how it goes down. So when people say, oh man, look at this particular nation, they were able to do whatever. They were in a particular moment in time. Think about it. During the 50s and 60s, the United States was a manufacturing powerhouse. We had one of the highest standard of living. We were living on a gold standard, right? I mean, think about that. It was like everybody talks and sings about how awesome it was. What they don't realize is that we were producing the world's greatest stuff, sending it out there to the world. The world sent us their gold. We concentrated all the gold here, raised our standard of living, and then when the world wanted the gold back, we said, go F off. All right? We are not giving it up. And instead, what we're going to do is we're going to go into 100% fiat currency. We're going to become lazy people and not produce our own stuff, and we're going to buy your stuff. So you go to work, you mine, you pollute your air. We're going to print up a bunch of money and buy all that wonderful products from you because we have a high standard of living and we live a luxurious life. This is how it went down, you know. I mean, people should really think, be thinking about that if they were to change the situation, we would have to become competitors against the world when it comes to production. That's scary. We don't produce it, right? We wouldn't be able to produce on a scale that the rest of the world can do. And we wouldn't be able to compete against them. And if we were to lower our standard of living so that we could compete against them, do you know how bad that would look? Like, nobody wants to live that life. I mean, I don't know, maybe some people do, I guess. I shouldn't say nobody. Bitcoin reminds me of the casino chips. Yeah. And I mean, this is what's funny is like, I like Bitcoin. Like, I have almost half a Bitcoin. I've been buying dollar cost averaging into Bitcoin for a really long time. I was super excited to see Bitcoin go over $100,000 yesterday. I mean, I was up like watching it, like, whoa, look at it go, 103. My gosh, whatever. I mean, I wasn't that excited that I was just like, oh man, here I'm in the money, whatever. It wasn't like that at all. It was just neat to see it happen. Because my expectations of Bitcoin is very low and I intend on having it forever. Like, I don't like, if it's going to be as popular as it is, and knowing that it's a deflationary currency and knowing that there's very little that of new Bitcoin coming into supply, the more you gather now is, I mean, it's like, you think about it, there is very it's such a small amount of Bitcoin out there. Think about it. There's 21 million coins that will ever be produced. How many have been lost? We still got another, a couple hundred, 150 years or whatever it is till they mine the last coins. I forget how far away it is, but I know it's always out there. Before they mine the last coins, which is only another 2 million coins, all the Bitcoin is out and a bunch of it is lost and a bunch of it's already concentrated. So how many people will have access to Bitcoin going into the future if this continues to happen, this concentration of Bitcoin? Right? If you have one Bitcoin, you have something that only 21 million people could ever do in the history of time. Right? It doesn't matter how far out you go. Right? One Bitcoin, only 21 million people will ever be able to do that. Now, I have almost half a Bitcoin, so 42 million people on the planet could ever possibly do what I have done. You know how unique that makes Bitcoin? Or somebody who has even half a Bitcoin or even a fraction of a Bitcoin. I mean, think about it. Half a Bitcoin, only 42 million people on the entire planet could ever possibly have that. Have that much at one time. And so you concentrate that down where people will literally have hundreds or thousands or a million Bitcoins, who knows? Like, I mean, how much it can get concentrated into a single hand. Leaving a half a Bitcoin or somebody owning half a Bitcoin to be in a very unique position, that is an extraordinary amount. So I don't know if people look at it that way, I mean, I look at silver in a pretty unique way inside of it too, because, you think about it like this. When it comes to silver, it actually is better than Bitcoin, because if you think about like silver and what it is used for, if you were to remove all the silver and gold, we'll put gold in there too, right? You remove these precious metals and just make it disappear, right? Tomorrow, boom, all the silver and gold is gone. Bitcoin would cease to exist. All our communications, our entire life, the network, the power grids, all that other stuff is reliant upon silver. It is a vital commodity for our life. Right? All these phones that we use, all the computers, everything would not exist without silver and gold. Now, if you were to take Bitcoin and remove it tomorrow, nothing would change. Some people would be disappointed, but nothing would change. Nothing about our lives, nothing about the way we conduct business, nothing would change. right? Just a bunch of disappointed people who invested into the or speculated in the wrong thing. That would change. So to understand that Bitcoin is far less greater than silver, like far less greater, silver is going to be the better position to be in if you have to choose between the two of them. Now, when we think about silver and how much is produced every year, right? I mean, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's probably like, it's just under like 1 billion ounces, if I remember right, 900 million ounces. So 900 million ounces are produced every year. This is globally, right? So you take 900 million ounces and you think about like like half of that would go into industrial purpose, which would leave somewhere around 500,000, 500,000 ounces to be distributed out there from the new production to go out there to the rest of the world. So now, if every single American decided that they were going to go out there and get just 2 ounces of silver, just two, we're talking less than $100 worth of silver, every single American goes out to try and attempt to get 2 ounces of new produced silver, it would eat up the entire global production for a year. If every American just went out to just get 2 ounces of silver. So now we start adding in Mexico, Canada, Russia, India, China, and all these other nations out there, and those people want to go out there and just get 1 ounce of silver. It would be such a limited amount that it would virtually disappear, and those who are in desperate need to build their cell phone or their computer component or whatever will pay any price because the amount that they need is just insignificant. So if silver is needing to go to $500 an ounce or $1,000 an ounce or even more, they will pay the price to get it. That makes silver incredibly unique in its own, that nobody seems to really appreciate. Underloved, undervalued, unappreciated. One of the coolest things that you could ever have in your life as an investor, because it is desperately needed for our way of life. Vital commodity. All right, moving on. Let's see here. People stop taking loans, get out of debt by Bitcoin when it dips, which increases your stack and commodity to an F the dollar. All right, the Federal Reserve note should be run out of this country. What are you going to replace it with? See, this is the problem that I find with it, is that there's no replacing it, because if you run it out of this country, you say, hey, get the F out of here, man. We don't want to use these Federal Reserve notes now. Let's go back to gold and silver. Your way of life would diminish immediately unless you export all your gold and silver out of the nation. Because if you're saying F the dollar and we don't want the dollar, then the rest of the world's going to say the exact same thing. And if they say it, then we'd have nothing to buy their production with, except for the gold and silver and Bitcoin. And since our standard of living is way up here and we don't produce enough to maintain that standard of living, our standard of living has to come down to what it is that we can produce, which is not nearly enough to maintain the high standard of living. So we go into poverty and misery. Like, it's not a good idea. I mean, I'm down for it. Let's do it, man. I got, I feel like I can position myself to deal with that sort of scenario. And I'm not trying to argue against it. What I am trying to say is that most people will be suffering in pain and misery. I might too. I don't think so. But again, like, I think about this stuff every waking minute of my life. So, I know I can probably look at the economic environment, considering that the dollar is no longer existing, and understand what it is that I need to do with the position that I would be able to take at the time. Most people would be begging the government to do something, but they wouldn't be able to do anything, because without the printing press, they would have to say, hey, we're going to have to tax you. And since you don't have any money because you sent it overseas to get the stuff to maintain your higher standard of living, it won't work. I mean, it just won't work. All right. Bitcoin was introduced on Halloween. Just a coincidence? Huh. I didn't know that. I didn't think about that. All right, the micro and the chart say Bitcoin will go 20,000. What do you think about that? I would not be surprised. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised to see Bitcoin I mean, what does it say to 20,000? I don't know about all the way to 20, but I mean, why not? Like, I mean, 5,000, who knows? I couldn't tell you where the Bitcoin is going to go. Bitcoin is incredibly volatile. So I don't get excited here when it's at 100,000 thinking, oh man, it's going to be like awesome. It's going to go to 1 million. I'm going to keep going. It's going to be awesome forever. I don't think that way. I just simply don't. Like, I don't look at it with any expectations other than what it is. It's Bitcoin, right? And thinking that it could go down to 20,000, I mean, it seems a lot. I mean, 5,000 seems a little unrealistic at this point, but I mean, 20,000 I don't think is like, say, so far out of possibilities. 50,000 I think is reasonable. Like, I think it could drop all the way to 50. I don't think that's out of the game. But who knows where it's going to go, and how far out into the future are we going to be talking about $50,000, $100,000 Bitcoin when it may be trading at, 1.2 million? Like, I mean, are we going to go back in the day and say, hey, remember when it was trading at 50 or 100? I mean, do we talk about the days when it was trading at 70 or 7,000 or 20,000 back then? I mean, we don't talk about it like, you know, it was an amazing event to be at 20,000, not like when the first days that it was hitting 20,000 and everybody was losing their mind over it, much like, $100,000 today. So again, low expectations of Bitcoin, very low. All right, what time is it? 30 minutes into it. Okay, guys, I'm going to give it like another 5-10 minutes here, and then we're going to call it quits. This has been a lot of fun. I like talking this topic because I think a lot of times people don't really understand or take into consideration Gresham's law, right? Gresham's law, where bad money chases out good. And to understand that the bad money has to be like completely abandoned for the good money to come in, for the good currency to come in. And when I say that, I mean, I'm serious, like people throwing their dollars out in the streets, no longer accepting it in their paychecks, no longer having a retirement fund priced in dollars. That's the type of stuff that I'm talking about, complete abandonment. Until then, the good currency will be hoarded away every single time. People will just be like, here's all these dollars, give me that gold, and I'll put it in my pocket. Same with the Bitcoin or everything else, if that's what people are truly desiring. All right. I wish that smart people would be spending their capital on something productive instead of holding Bitcoin. Whatever. Like, okay, let me ask you, if I saved a bunch of money well, not saved a bunch of money, if I speculated a bunch of money into Bitcoin and it goes up to $500,000, and I say, wow, $500,000, maybe at this point I can borrow against that Bitcoin and start building houses. Like, saving now to be a productive person in the future. See, savings and production. Savings and production. Most people don't really think about having to sacrifice the time now to pay for the future. Much like the beers and saws analogy, even if you borrow money to buy saws, you have to work the saws. You have to cut up lumber, fashion it together, build a product that you can sell. You do this over and over and over again, and at some point in the future, it starts to benefit you in an extreme way. Until then, you have to pay the debts, you have to pay your lifestyle, you have to do all this stuff, but then eventually you get to the point where the debts are paid and the production is now benefiting you. But you had to pay for that saw first. And so, same thing, if you're producing and saving, if you're in a savings position with the intent of being in production in the future, this is the sacrifice you have to take. You have to postpone your spending, you have to postpone the luxurious and pleasurable experiences out there and sacrifice it into savings, which is being excellence. All right. All right. Good evening, UE. Good evening. Alrighty, guys. I'm going to give it like one more comment here, and then we're going to call it quits. Gresham's law has more to do with currency and money. Money will always have value. Currency sucks. Yeah, and that's a good way to kind of looking at it. I mean, especially because a lot of times people don't really think about it being two different things, money and currency. Like, to understand, money is like gold and silver. And gold and silver can act like a currency. Like, I can trade my time and, products, efforts, whatever for a silver coin, or I can pay it off to somebody for their products or whatever they got. It can be used as a form of currency, but ultimately it's money because it is something that is tangible. It's something that is in your hand. It's something that is recognizable, and it's something that can last forever, and it's limited, right? So looking at it as money, saying, hey, this holds value. It has something it has a useful ability outside of even what's written on it, right? The metal itself is valuable. This will store value. It can be used as a currency, but it's not necessarily always used as a currency. It could be used as a store of value. Currency, on the other hand, like dollars, can only be used as currency. Like, you can do some short-term expectations of storing value, like, on the very short term, from the time you get paid to, like, maybe a few weeks and months, or maybe even a few years into the future, depending on how rampant the inflationary scenario is at the time. But that is not really the purpose of a currency. The currency is meant to trade goods and services for other goods and services, to facilitate the trade. And that's it. That's the whole point of currency. The moment that we put an expectation on it that says, hey, this thing should be storing value, look how much it's depreciating, look how the spending, the purchasing power is depleting, all those expectations that you're putting on currency, it should be on money. Like, that expectation is for money. But if you put that expectations on currency, you're going to be incredibly disappointed, because currency doesn't do that. Currency is meant to facilitate the trade. You take your currency and you move it over into the items in which that is going to store value and is going to hold on to its purchasing power. And when you look at it this way and you focus in on it this way, it starts to make a whole lot more sense. Man, I get my dollars. I don't expect it to hold value. I do expect myself to understand what it is that I need to do with this dollars in order to protect my savings, future purchasing power, all those things. Right? Once you kind of get it in that fashion, then you don't blame the dollar anymore. You don't get mad at Powell for destroying the dollar, or whatever. I mean, you can still get mad at him for all kinds of things, but it doesn't make, you start realizing that's not really there's not going to be any purpose behind that. All right. Very interesting. Yeah, you guys like this stuff? It's a lot of fun. I love talking this topic, but it was a great night. But we're 37 minutes into it. I was only going to do a half hour. I'm going to go watch Freddie finish off his basketball practice. You guys have been awesome. We got 173 oh, God, Lord, I can't speak. 173 people watching with 75 likes, 76 likes. Do me a favor, go hit that like button before you leave the live stream. By hitting that like button, the algorithm will pick up the video, spread it around for more people to watch. We can come back into this and to the comment section after the video gets uploaded and have more discussion about currencies and how it is that Bitcoin will not be a world reserve currency, can't be a world reserve currency because of its limitations on how many transactions that it can do at a price level that is consistent. Right? I mean, it can always facilitate the transactions, but you're always going to have to accept ever increasing amounts less ever decreasing amounts of Bitcoin in order for it to continue to facilitate trades, which doesn't work out very well for people who have taken out loans, right? Deflationary currencies don't work. I mean, they do work in a sense, but only for the producing nations. All right, I gotta go. I just keep going. Uneducated Economist. You guys let me know.